Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. Vickie, Brett, and Amanda Selogie are also joining me today. And today they're going to talk about the new dyslexia screening law, what it means for young people. Vickie and Amanda are educational attorneys who, through the Inclusive Education Project, focus on advocating and educating families about their legal rights. They are absolutely committed to strengthening their clients and immerse themselves in the world of civil rights and educational advocacy through their work in education and empowerment. I'm absolutely thrilled that they are joining me again today.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Welcome back, Vickie and Amanda.
Hello. Thank you for having us.
I'm so glad to have you here. It's always so great to talk to you, whether it's on your podcast or mine. We're always addressing the most pressing issues, it seems, at any given time. I think our first recording was during COVID, when people were trying to figure out what were a child's rights during COVID when they needed special education services, and maybe they weren't getting them because of the pandemic. So I think that was our introduction to each other.
Yeah, it's just crazy that it's been several years now and we're still dealing with some kiddos who still haven't gotten the services that they should have gotten back then. Whether it's because of a school district's error or like staffing issues, like the amount of staffing issues from like comp ed, like, yeah, we owe you comp ed, to even, I just was in an IEP meeting the other day where this is now, we're mid-October and the school does not have an assigned speech therapist and hasn't for this entire school year. And they still have no information on when. So kids have had 2 months of no speech.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I wasn't even aware that that was still an issue. I knew that there were staffing shortages. I knew that a lot of practitioners had left following the pandemic. And then there are a lot of kids who are in more need of services now than they were pre-pandemic because some issues were not identified or they just were not getting the services at that time because of access issues and availability.
Yeah. And I think part of it is a lot of the people leaving the field, but also what we've seen is all the kiddos that should have started either TK, transitional kindergarten, or kindergarten, like in 2020, and they had the first 2-3 years of their educational career basically nothing, because like for, a 10, 11, 12-year-old accessing on Zoom, there's those struggles, but like they hopefully already know how to read. But like those foundational years, those kids that didn't get anything, and if their parents were struggling trying to still hold the job or even like put food on the table during the pandemic, like those are the kiddos that maybe they would have never needed an IEP or a 504 plan. Maybe they would have been fine. But because of the pandemic, that was what led to there being a significant gap. So I think like that being said also led to just more kids needing services. And so then these providers are stretched so thin.
Absolutely. And I was going to ask if this is a busy time for you both, because sometimes at the beginning of the school year, it's a little bit quiet and then progress reports come out and then everybody needs an assessment, needs support, is asking for accommodations or modifications. And so it sounds like it's been an ongoing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, October traditionally is pretty busy in May. So by October, if you started in, August, maybe end of September, early October, you're getting IEP meetings or you're seeing issues. The teacher has gotten to know the child, relatively well. So we're having a lot of IEP meetings. And then on the flip side, in the spring, you're just trying to make it through that transition back from winter break. Maybe you have some annuals, and by May, I think people realize, oh my God, it's almost the end of the year. We need to do something. I think we honestly, since like the 10th of October, I think we've had one new client call or provide an intake to our office. And that's a lot. That's a lot. One every day for the past, week and a half. That's 10 new clients potentially, right? So yeah, October is pretty big. And then it's right before the holidays as well in October, right? Everybody wants to kind of get it in before November and December. I mean, that's the Friday afternoon of the year, right? Everybody wants to circle back in January, but we're here and we're like, no, do it now.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Can't wait till January for so many of these kiddos. We just can't wait.
No. I mean, that time is so important when you're talking about intervention for kiddos and getting them the support that they need. And like you said, the holidays, I can't believe we're even saying this already, that the holidays are right around the corner. It just seems like once Thanksgiving's here, then it's January because...
Well, yeah, because with all of the breaks, I mean, just about now, I think almost every school, at least ones we deal with, have the entire week of Thanksgiving off. Some even have like the Friday before that, or the Monday after. And then, sometimes there's parent-teacher conferences in October or November, which takes up an entire week of like half days where nothing's getting done during those days. And then we got the 2-3 weeks of winter break. So, I mean, in reality, from October through December 31st, I mean, we probably have 4 full weeks, which is really not fair for kiddos who really need the support. And if we're in a position where we're trying to figure out, does this child need services at all? Maybe they don't have an IEP or a 504 yet, or we're trying to figure out, do they need other services? So, I have a kiddo who we're transitioning to using the school bus, and he has an aide all day, and for some reason the school thinks it's fine that he doesn't need an aide on the bus, which makes no sense to me because he's had an aide for 10 years plus. But I digress. So they're saying, okay, well, let's try an aide on the bus and take data. And the team was trying to say, okay, well, we'll do it, for the next X amount of like days. And I said, well, we can't really put a number on it because in order for you to take away the aid, like let's say you try to say that the aid is not necessary, but we have to have a meeting, a discussion to decide if we're taking something away, right? When are we having that IEP meeting? Between all of the holidays and the end of the year, if we say we're doing 30 days of data, like 30 school days between now and the end of the school year, I'm not confident that we're having that IEP before January. It should. It absolutely should.
Right. And I mean, this just brings up the whole idea about how important it is for parents to really know what their children's rights are, to get information about how to advocate for their children at school, with the school, to make sure that when their child is in need of services, is in need of modifications, accommodations, therapeutic interventions, that they're getting them in a timely manner and they're being implemented in a way that helps that child to access the curriculum and to show growth. And you both do such an amazing job of really clarifying for parents and educating parents on what their rights are and breaking apart the law and, helping parents to know what to ask for, how to ask for it, and what to do when they feel like their children's needs are not being met by the school. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you here. That's one of the reasons why I love talking to you both. Since we spoke last, I believe in July of this year, which is 2023, we're recording this, Governor Gavin Newsom in California signed a bill into law. I don't think it takes effect until next year, but it specifically states that it's for screening for risk of reading difficulties. And I think when it's in the media, it says California mandates dyslexia screening. Does that mean that effective 2024, schools are required to screen students in kindergarten through second grade for reading delays, including dyslexia? I wanted to have you on to unpack this because we're getting lots of questions from parents asking, what does this mean?
Yeah, so I mean, it's really funding for, I think it's like $1 million for implementing universal screening, kindergarten through second grade. for at-risk dyslexia. This is something that many other states implemented during COVID. There was COVID funding, and they really turned their attention to this, and California resisted. Some of the opponents were saying, it's too much testing. It's too much testing. We're going to over-identify dyslexia. Okay, well, you know, using these screenings, you can't over-identify. You're just appropriately identifying. And if there was an over-identification, then maybe we should take a step back and look how we're actually teaching reading instruction and change it. But anyway, I'm getting off track. But essentially, you know, we have had districts say, we've already been doing that with, you know, the programming that we have. You know, it is something now that we'll share with you. So we've had that. Well, we've always done this. And here, now I'm going to show you the last 3 years worth of this testing. And, you know, we're seeing it, and it's like, oh, then this child has been at risk and you haven't shared that with the parents. So being in on the loop and actually them not just kind of gatekeeping that information, that's a real benefit that we see here with this universal screening tool that it now needs to be implemented.
Ultimately, the bottom line of the law is, yes, schools are supposed to implement this starting next school year, but the key word is supposed to. Just like the reason why we have jobs in the first place is school districts often don't do what they're supposed to do. So that's the takeaway number one. Is the goal with this law, and what we like about it, is it's supposed to be a universal screening tool, meaning anywhere in California you go, it's the same tool. It should be the same tool. It should be the same methodology. All of that should be the same. But as Vickie mentioned, it's only $1 million set aside for this. And the state has said that there's going to be more coming. There's going to be more legislation coming and more funding coming, because the problem is we have this tool that all these teachers are going to be trained on. We're going to be using it for all K through second graders. But where do we go from here? Where do we go from the information that we gather from this testing? Because, you know, at the end of the day, if we don't have a next step, a step two, once we identify these kids, then we're going to have a problem. And what we are concerned about, and I think we had a podcast episode, we talked about this, is we already have a lot of school districts who implement what they call response to intervention, RTI, student success team meetings, SST meetings, where schools have for a long time said that we identify kids who are, you know, on this lower level of reading skills, and we have these reading groups, and we already identify, as Vickie mentioned, we already identify kids who need a little bit of extra help. And what often happens we see with these SST or these RTI groups is that it is just kicking the can down the road to when these kids get IEPs or 504 plans. Because more often than not, the kids who go through SST or RTI are going to end up needing IEPs, because the intervention being provided through RTI or these reading groups is often not enough. It's the same curriculum, or maybe a slightly different curriculum as the rest of the class at maybe a slower pace. But what we find with kids with dyslexia is that they need a completely different type of program, intervention. So just putting them in a smaller group, giving them extra time, often doesn't do it. And then they just become more and more behind, to the point where then they're in second grade and now they need an IEP and intensive intervention. Whereas maybe in kindergarten, had we provided them appropriate dyslexia reading intervention throughout the whole class, then they would never need an IEP ever. And I mean, I'm being speculative, right? We don't know each individual child. Some kids might still need it for, you know, this or that. But generally that's what we see. I mean, when kids come to us, they're asking for IEPs in second, third, fourth, even fifth, sixth, seventh grade. And that's the pattern that we saw, is that they were in these reading groups in kindergarten and first grade and second grade. They did RTI, they did X, Y, and Z. So the question we have for the state, the legislature, and the State Department of Education is, what are you going to do next? And what is that plan going to be? Because if it's just, we're going to give tools for schools to do more of this RTI BS, then that's not going to be sufficient. If we're going to be truly revamping the way we have our reading intervention across the board, because I think we're going to see a significant percentage of students who need this. So why not just do it throughout the whole class? Let's help every kid. So that's kind of what we're waiting to see, like, because there's two prongs to anytime we do any kind of screening, is the screening itself, but then what happens next. So it is effective in January of 2024, but it will be implemented and mandated by 25-26 school year. So the reason that we need the timing is because an independent panel is we're going to get a little bit more guidance than we have in the past with certain things, right? And so what tools can be used. There is a little bit more thought, and it's just going to take a little bit of time. But it sounds like they're on the right path. And there are plenty of people that have already been doing this. Our good friend Kathy Johnson has been an advocate for dyslexia for 25 plus years, knows the screening tools to use and things like that. And so that's what's happening right now, or will in January 2024, with an independent panel to see what screening tools can be used. But Amanda and I obviously are focused, and it's going to be at the latter end. We're really going to see what happens in the 25-26 school year and how districts are using the information. That we are already kind of setting our eyes and setting up teams to really be able to have a thorough discussion, even if our kiddo has a different type of disability. Yeah. And one thing I'll mention too about that timing is that this timing coincides with the universal pre-kindergarten program in the state of California. So we are slowly fading in the program for 3 and 4-year-olds. So by 25-26 school year, all 4-year-olds in the state of California, no matter your income, no matter where you are, will have a spot in a pre-kindergarten TK program. And that's going to make a huge difference too here, because now we have the ability to screen and really get kids in. And then they don't have the timing yet, but a couple years later will be the 3-year-old program. And some schools already have, a plan. Some school districts and county department of ed's already starting to plan for these 3-year-olds. So there's a lot that's going to go on with these younger kiddos in the next few years to watch out for. But it also means that there's a lot more that they have to kind of plan for. And when we say like that $1 million is only so much, because now, like in today's kids, how many kids are in TK and kindergarten, it's going to be very different in 25-26. I think we're going to see a huge influx. So it's going to be very interesting these next couple of years.
It really is. And it just, I'm listening to you both speak, and I'm thinking there's so many additional questions that I know that parents have. I know that I have, educators might have. A couple things that stood out to me. One, and you've said this, is that screening is not the same thing as intervention. And I think that's important for parents to know that. Again, I think the question is, well, what happens after the screening, which is what you all have said. If screening means that you're identifying kids who are at risk for dyslexia or have dyslexia, like you said, then what? We know that evidence-based interventions for dyslexia work, but if kids are being screened and not given those evidence-based interventions and are just meeting with a teacher, in small groups and giving extended time, that is not an intervention for dyslexia, not an evidence-based one.
Right. And I would say a screening is also not an assessment. So we do get parents that sometimes get confused. Let's say they're going through this process and they go through a screener and their child is identified. And remember, it's not a diagnosis. So your child, if you're screened, you're not going to get this paper that says you have a diagnosis of dyslexia. It's going to be that there is basically a high probability or a high risk for dyslexia. So what should happen from there, not just the intervention piece, but there should be a conversation between the school team and the parents of, is this a child who should go through further assessments to determine if an IEP or a 504 plan is necessary? And in some cases, we shouldn't be waiting for this intervention, whatever that intervention that's coming next per these screeners, that's going to be across the board for kiddos. It may not be something that we need to or should wait to see if it works before we do a full comprehensive assessment for an IEP. So parents need to be on the lookout for that too, because an IEP is different than, are they at risk for needing further intervention?
Right. And that at-risk piece also stood out to me because I'm not sure in the law whether it says K through second grade. Does everyone get screened in kindergarten, or is it just kids who are at risk? And then how do you identify which kids are at risk?
No, everyone would be evaluated. A notice has to be, the school districts will be in charge of how the notice is provided to parents. There will be an opt-out for parents, obviously giving them the option to say, no, I don't want you to screen my child. And each year, it's not just in kindergarten, then we're not going to do it in second grade. The law it's even gone even more specific. Let's say that you switch schools and your kid got there a week after the testing happened. That local education agency, LEA, has 45 days to assess that child. Like, they're really, again, this is all in a perfect world, right? And it's going to go swimmingly and, everything like that. But the law does outline that, which is wonderful. It's the at risk that you're seeing in the law that, like, the child is screened and then they're marked as at risk, right? And so then interventions do need to be provided, like the evidence-based, like monitoring, things like that. But I think the fine line these districts and LEAs are going to walk is to provide those, but simultaneously not trigger the child find requirement of the special education law, of the IDEA. Because if a district is alerted, notified of reasonable suspicion, if you will, right? Like, do we have a suspected disability? That's what the language is. Reasonable suspicion, I'm thinking of my crim law days in law school, reasonable suspicion to pull somebody over. But the special education law is there a suspected disability here? And I think it's going to be really difficult for districts to have at risk seeing how the child, and then taking all the information of how the child is actually performing in the classroom, academically speaking. I think they're going to have a hard time denying special education assessments because we have that child find trigger. So, we would tell parents, look, this screening is just more information. They're not going to screen your child. They're not going to make them special ed and then you don't have any choice. No, you still have a choice. We are trying to move the stigma of dyslexia and reading delays away from, we love to label things, unfortunately, but this really is a tool. It should be one tool. It should be one thing that they are using.
Yeah, and for a screener to really work, it has to be done for all kids, because when we talk about IEP's assessments and what Vickie just said of a suspected disability, that is subjective, right? It is subjective to the teacher and the parents and all that stuff. Now, the threshold is very low. That's why there's going to be a fine line. But when we come to screeners and this at risk, that's going to be more objective. It's going to be the screener that's going to say, based on these numbers, you are at risk. And that's why it's not a diagnosis, and it's not supposed to be an automatic, like the way they've put it out in the law is that if you're noted as at risk, it's not an automatic trigger that there's an assessment. Because that piece of it of, is there a suspected disability? We would argue that in most cases that we deal with, that if you're marked as at risk, it's very likely there's a suspicion of a disability and you should do an assessment. What we're afraid of is that we're going to get school districts that kind of put in place like protocols for teachers, where they say it as, well, this kid's doing fine academically, so even though they were marked at risk, we're not moving forward on anything. And so that's where it gets murky into that gray area of, if you're a parent and you got that marked at risk, you need to be looking at all these other factors, because a lot of times with kids with dyslexia, what we find is they are very bright and they're able to compensate in the early years. And so they might be doing academically okay, but is that academically okay for their own abilities? And looking at, maybe they should be like really, really even like in gait or something like that, maybe not even necessarily gait, but like they should be exceeding expectations. But like the low expectations for kindergarten, first grade, and even sometimes second grade, like is so low. We don't have preschool standards, really fully. So we're dealing with like, what are those expectations? And like, yeah, they're doing okay academically. So we have to really dig a little bit deeper into how is the child doing in terms of the letters and, paying attention. And there's more to it than that. And so I think the best guidance for parents is when this screener starts. I mean, by the time it starts, we're going to have more information. So we'll have to, have more chats with you. But from what we're seeing now is like, if you get that notice that like, okay, your child was marked at risk, if there is any inkling in your mind that, yeah, this makes sense, or you have a family history, or you're just not sure, ask for assessments, because that is enough under the IDEA to trigger the threshold of an assessment. Is that if the parent is like, I really think that there's something more there, they should assess. Don't just let the team say, no, I think your kid's fine. I wouldn't worry about it. Trust your gut.
And I think that's a really important piece because I think one of the things you were saying before is if we were collecting some of this data all along, it seems like it wasn't getting into the hands of parents to make an informed decision on what to do for their child regarding this information. But it sounds like with this law, parents will get information about whether their child is at risk. I think about, I just got a letter from the school that my kids are going to have a vision and a hearing exam through the school. And they give you a little piece of paper that tells you whether to follow up. It sounds like it's very similar. So parents will have this information, but the question is, what should they do? They may not know what does this mean? But what I'm hearing from you is if there is enough information that being at risk is enough of a trigger for them, particularly if a child has maybe had language delays, was late in learning to speak, or may have had articulation issues, because we know that those kids are at greater risk for reading difficulties anyway. If you have a family history of reading difficulties, learning difficulties, and you get this notice for your child, it sounds like if parents are asking, what should I do in this situation? The next step should be to seek out a more comprehensive evaluation to make sure that your child is getting the support they need.
Yeah, I mean, it does kind of lay out what a school district needs to do, which is provide evidence-based literacy instruction, and the progress monitoring. This is similar to what Amanda was alluding to and referring to specifically by name, the RTIs and things like that. They may also do the student success team meetings. So they are triggered and obligated to do certain things. Where the gray area is will that be enough, right? And if we're saying that most IEPs, once they have become eligible for an IEP, don't even provide that, is what they are obligated to one-to-one group instruction, like you said, is it just with the teacher? Like, what kind of training does a teacher have? And then another component is the further evaluation or diagnostic assessment. So as a parent, I mean, you know your child best. If they're in kindergarten and you had a hard time reading, you actually didn't read until first, second grade, and you know that, and you feel confident in the teachers that, I'm going to have them do it the way that they want to do it. Let me look at what the evidence-based, training that they are using, the reading literacy program that they are using. And if you feel comfortable with it, then that's fine. But I think what Amanda and I are trying to drive home is if there's anything else, the family history, behaviors, your child is delayed in speaking. They're just having a tough time. As Amanda has said on our podcast, a first grader, they shouldn't be getting Fs, or ones and two, or, whatever it is now. But, it's definitely something that, like, I don't want parents taking this away and being like, oh my God, it's one other thing that I have to be on top of. It is not. In a perfect world, and the way that the law is written, there are certain things that the school, it will trigger in the school, but you have to be vigilant like you always have to be, right? In requesting more if you feel, as an expert in your child, that more is needed.
Yeah. And I mean, realistically, in a perfect world, if the state wanted to throw as much money as was needed at this, right, then every school in the state of California would be trained on the cream of the crop, Orton Gillingham or some program like that. And every kid would get that. And then those kids that go through screeners, maybe you're just sending extra progress reports and we're not worried. You know, in a perfect world, what we see is the reality of the education system and the reality of these mandates that come down and what schools and what we're anticipating schools saying, because they've already been saying it. They say it for kids like already on IEPs that we see, you know, that like we're doing X, Y, and Z and it's enough, when, you know, in reality, we know it's not, you know, so like we said, this is going to take effect in a bit. And then hopefully between now and the time the screeners come, hopefully there's more legislation on that step 2 of like the intervention that's required after that. Like our hope would be that that's the case. And that if we're having a universal screener, we should have a universal intervention program that is across the board too. And so that would be our hope is like if there is legislation between now and then, you know, because things just, you know, take a while to get through, you know, that would be the hope. We'll see kind of and that's going to impact whether or not we go to needing an IEP assessment. But as Vickie mentioned, like there's often other things going on with kiddos. Maybe they're in first grade when they get marked as risk and they've been in the systems. They've been, you know, they went through preschool and they've been in a learning environment for quite some time and they've been struggling. So even if we have that perfect world of we're having an intervention program at that point, that might be great for helping with dyslexia. Maybe they've had 3-4 years where they've been struggling. And so they have significant anxiety, or their communication with their peers has been impacted. Their problem solving skills has been impacted. So a lot of other things to think about. So like, even if we're solving this dyslexia piece, like, and that's that perfect world, there still may be other things that we need to be thinking about. So that's just to say, if you get back your kid's screener on the flip side and they're not marked as risk, but you still in your gut think that there's something else going on, or they're marked as risk and they're provided intervention program, you still have a right to ask for an assessment because there's other areas that could be impacted.
Right. And to ask questions about what that intervention looks like. If a school is going to be implementing some type of intervention in response to the child being identified as being at risk. Do we have any, you know, great examples from other states? Because obviously California is not the only state that has this universal mandate or dyslexia screening. Are there any other states that have been utilizing this dyslexia screening and maybe even have a part 2 already put in place that we can use as an example of what we aspire to be?
Yeah, I mean, just in the state of Massachusetts, but Boston, for instance, they had implemented screening, and then they actually just went to a specific way of teaching children how to read. And I mean, Cassie Johnson has it memorized. And this is just kind of us talking out loud about it from what she's told us and what we read up after. And essentially, you know, all public schools in the greater Boston area, you know, teach, for example, how Amanda had said, the Orton Gillingham way of teaching reading, right? Focusing on the different, like, fluency, phonological awareness. Like, you hear all these, like, buzzwords, right? Like, there's, like, 5 pillars or whatnot. But the screeners are still there. But now, you know, 80% of the students or whatever, and don't quote me on that, but are now successful in reading by the time they exit 2nd grade, right? Because then when we go to 3rd grade, we're not learning how to read. We are reading to learn. And so that's why the focus is on the early intervention of kindergarten through 2nd grade, in case the child, you know, for whatever reason was performing well, and it's possible, right? And it's not just dyslexia, there's other reading, learning challenges that exist out there. I don't, you know, we keep referencing dyslexia, but, you know, a lot of states have been using the screening, and then appropriately, you know, and their special education laws could be impacted or different, right? And I think The problem with looking at other states, sometimes the data is very useful, but California is so massive. We're the fifth largest economy in the world. It is difficult as opposed to, a smaller state that could, implement a universal reading tool or screener.
Yeah, I think what we're going to see for the state of California is going to be similar to what we're seeing for the universal pre-kindergarten, is that the state is putting out mandates. The screener, it's easy to do the same screener across the board, across the state, but in terms of implementation, I think it's going to be left to the county Department of Education's. I'm part of one of the local planning councils for Orange County, and so we've been doing work on helping the county develop their plan for making sure that the universal pre-kindergarten program is inclusive. And from everything I know from that and what I've seen is that it sounds like that's going to play a big role in terms of the counties are going to be required to put together a plan. The way they did it for the universal pre-K is that there are grants available. And essentially, in order for the counties to have the grant funding to implement these programs, is that they have to put together like a program. And so it sounds like it's going to be probably what I would guess, like each county comes up with their own plan and program for implementation. And then they get grant funding based on that. And so, what it's going to look like in Orange County may be very different than what it looks like in Sacramento County and whatnot, because we have very diverse, counties. San Bernardino County has so many rural spots of it, and up in the mountains. And so that's going to look very different, in terms of, are we implementing it school by school? Because does that mean we have to have extra staffing? It would be easy for, let's just say, Santa Ana Unified, if they hired, 3 interventionists that can go and train teachers at every school, and they're going and they're monitoring, it's easy for them to drive, from one school to another and be at each school site maybe once a week. They could have, staffing for that, right? They could hire someone for that. But in San Bernardino, are they going to be able to have that same 1, 2, 3 people who are going to up into the mountains, up into Lake Arrowhead and Mammoth, and then all out to Palm Springs? So it's going to be different each county on how they implement, how they train teachers, because that training piece is going to be big. Because if we are creating new intervention programs, which it should be new in most cases, that's going to require a lot of training and a lot of logistics, which of course our staffing issue is not going to help with that.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things I was thinking about as, I was preparing for this discussion, is logistically what that would look like. And it seems like we're still figuring it out in terms of what that looks like.
Well, that's why it's not going to take place until 25, 26. There needs to be timing. There needs to be a way to look at the diverse population, not just how populous California is, but how diverse it is. And finding a universal screener that checks all those boxes is going to take some time. And that's why that independent panel now, as early as January 2024, will have to get their boots on the ground and running so that something can be determined, the tools can be determined, and then, districts have, or the local education agencies or SELPAs and whatnot will be able to then choose and then implement as they see fit, right? So it's really important for parents to be on the lookout for any information the district, even if you're reading it and you're like, this isn't until next year, I don't have to pay attention. There are going to be meetings, school board meetings and things of that nature, so that they can adopt it into their board policy. You really want to try to pay attention to what is happening and how your district is moving forward in figuring out how to implement this screener in 25, 26.
Wonderful. Thank you for clarifying that. And I think each of us has said at one point during this conversation, in an ideal world, right? And, we're hoping in an ideal world, this is a great thing for students. This leads to early identification, which leads to earlier intervention, which leads to better outcomes. And that is the hope with mandates and laws that go into effect like this one. I can't thank you enough for helping us to unpack this information. We're going to have you back to talk about the preschool laws and mandates that are coming up. But, with new laws, new mandates, there are always questions about what are my child's rights? What does this mean for my child, for the children in my child's classroom? So I'm grateful to you both for making yourselves available to answer questions. If parents have more questions for you both, I'm sure that they will, or want to get in touch with you because they need some additional support with advocating for their child, or they need legal representation as they work to ensure that their children are getting the support that they need, what is the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Yeah, the quickest way is to actually just go to our website, inclusiveeducationproject.org/contact. Or once you get to our website, you just go to the contact page, and then we have our intake on there, so they can fill that out. Very quick, easy. I just the other day saw a parent do it at like 12:30 a.m. in the morning. Like, it's just a real easy way to just kind of give us a brief snapshot of what's been going on, what issues, and then our staff will contact you with next steps, and then you can get on the phone with Amanda or I.
Yeah. And then, of course, we have our podcast, the Inclusive Education Project podcast,
yes,
which is on all the streaming platforms, and our Instagram, where we share information from our podcasts and also, updates on mandates. And Vickie and I try to show our face as much as we can, but with little kids, sometimes it's not as
you do a great job. Like. I highly, highly recommend your podcast. And again, your Instagram account. You guys get on there all the time and share such great information. And it's just really helpful to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. When your child is struggling, educating yourself is essential to your child's success. And advocating for your child becomes really important. That's why we recently launched self-paced mini courses that provide a roadmap for supporting your child at home and at school. These mini courses are available for parents and caregivers of children diagnosed with ADHD, anxiety, or dyslexia. And when you purchase a mini course, you will be able to join weekly Ask Me Anything live sessions with me. Go to childnexus.com and click on mini courses for more information. I will see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.